Hello, we're going to be reading from Black Beauty today. I'm at home filming this video, so that's why it looks a little different. But just as usual, I'm going to be presenting my screen so you can follow along with me. The PDF form of this is also available on Bright Thinker. It does not have a due date, so it's not going to show up in your to-do list. But if you go to literature and go to Black Beauty, the Black Beauty PDF is there. And that just means online, you can just go to a website and follow along with the whole book, just like I'm reading. So in our last chapter that we read, we found out that Black Beauty was named by Squire Gordon's wife, and they talk about his character. He's a very kind horse. He follows directions really well, and he looks really similar to Rob Roy, and that's because Rob Roy, the horse from chapter 2 who died in a hunting accident, he was actually his brother. So we found that out in chapter 2. That was really sad that they never got to know each other. So I'm going to present my screen for us to read 2 chapters today, chapters 6 and 7. Starting with chapter 6, Liberty. Now, before we start, I hope that some of you all know what liberty is already. If not, we'll have some conversation about that in class. But liberty, you might think of like the Statue of Liberty. Liberty, the synonym for it would be freedom. So having liberty means that you can do what you'd like to do without really restraints. Nobody's going to stop you from doing what you'd like to do. So we're going to see what that looks like for Black Beauty. I was quite happy in my new place. And if there was one thing that I missed, it must not be thought I was discontented. Discontent means not happy with what you have. All who had to do with me were good, and I had a light, airy stable and the best of food. We know he has a better situation than most horses, right? What more could I want? Black Beauty asks. Why, liberty or freedom. That's what he wants. For 3 years and a half of my life, I had had all the liberty I could wish for. But now, week after week, month after month, and no doubt year after year, I must stand up in a stable night and day, except when I am wanted. And then I must be just as steady and quiet as any old horse who has worked 20 years. Straps here and straps there, a bit in my mouth and blinkers over my eyes. Now, I'm not complaining, Black Beauty says, for I know it must be so. I only mean to say that for a young horse full of strength and spirits, who has been used to some large field or plain, where he can fling up his head and toss up his tail and gallop away at full speed, then round and back again with a snort to his companions, I say it is hard never to have a bit more liberty to do as you like. Sometimes when I've had less exercise than usual, I have felt so full of life and spring that when John has taken me out to exercise, I really could not keep quiet. Do what I would, it seemed as if I must jump or dance or prance, and many a good shake I know I must have given him, especially at first, but he was always good and patient. Do any of you ever feel like this? And I know we're not in a normal school setting, but I would think especially the contrast between when you're in class and you have to follow orders, you have to sit at your seat and do your classwork and stay fairly quiet. Then when you go outside for recess, I think a lot of you want to be able to run around and yell and call after your friends, right? You've got liberty or freedom when you're in times like that. Now, this is it John or James speaking here? Steady, steady, my boy, he would say. Wait a bit, and we will have a good swing and soon get the tickle out of your feet. He knows that Black Beauty really wants to move around. He has that kind of longing in him. Then as soon as we were out of the village, he would give me a few miles as a spanking trot, and then bring me back as fresh as before, only clear of the fidgets, as he called them. To fidget means to kind of squirm around. And Black Beauty has that, especially since he's just a young horse. He's quite young. Spirited horses, when not enough exercised, are often called skittish, when it is only play, and some grooms will punish them. But our John did not. He knew it was only high spirits. So spirits, high spirited, that just means he likes to move around. There's energy. A lot of you probably have high energy. You want to be able to move around and talk. And Black Beauty, he wants to have that movement, especially because he's so young. So he's not misbehaving. He just has energy. He's spirited. Still, he had his own ways of making me understand by the tone of his voice or the touch of the rein. If he was very serious and quite determined, I always knew it by his voice, and that had more power with me than anything else, for I was very fond of him. And it is good and right for horses in this case, but also you all, you children, that you would have sometimes that you know you have to stay quiet and you're not going to be allowed to run and play, right? There are times when it's important to to stay quiet and do what you're told. And then there's other times when you should have that liberty or freedom to run and yell and call after your friends and chase. Now, I ought to say that sometimes we had our liberty for a few hours. This used to be on fine Sundays in the summertime. The carriage never went out on Sundays because the church was not far off. It was a great treat to us to be turned out into the home paddock or the old orchard. The grass was so cool and soft to our feet, the air so sweet, and the freedom to do as we liked was so pleasant. To gallop, to lie down and roll over on our backs, or to nibble the sweet grass. Then it was a very good time for talking, as we stood together under the shade of the large chestnut tree. So he gets moments where he can just play and run and do as he pleases. Now, let's find out a little conversation he has with Ginger. One day, when Ginger and I were standing alone in the shade, we had a great deal of talk. She wanted to know all about my bringing up and breaking in. And I told her. We've already heard this story of how he was broken in. Well, said she, if I had had your bringing up, I might have had as good a temper as you. But now I don't believe that I ever shall. Why not? I said. Because it has been all so different with me, she replied. I never had anyone, horse or man, that was ever kind to me, or that I cared to please. For in the first place, I was taken from my mother as soon as I was weaned, and put with a lot of other young colts. None of them cared for me, and I cared for none of them. There was no kind master like yours to look after me, and talk to me, and bring me nice things to eat. The man that had the care of us never gave me a kind word in my life. I do not mean that he ill-used me, but he did not care for us one bit further than to see that we had plenty to eat and shelter in the winter. A footpath ran through our field, and very often the great boys passing through would fling stones to make us gallop. We know that that happened for Black Beauty, but somebody intervened, right? Now, I was never hit, but one fine young colt was badly cut in the face, and I should think it would be a scar for life. We did not care for them, but of course it made us more wild, and we settled it in our minds that boys were our enemies. We had very good fun in the free meadows, galloping up and down and chasing each other round and round the field, then standing still under the shade of the trees. But when it came to breaking in, that was a bad time for me. Several men came to catch me, and when at last they closed me in at one corner of the field, one caught me by the forelock, another caught me by the nose, and held it so tight I could hardly draw my breath. Then another took my under jaw in his hard hand and wrenched my mouth open. And so by force, they got on the halter into the bar into my mouth. Then one dragged me along by the halter, another flogging or whipping behind. And this was the first experience I had of man's kindness. It was all by force. Remember how Black Beauty was raised? He had to do all these same things. He had to have a harness and a saddle and bit and bridle. But the farmer was very kind and gentle with him. He had him get used to various things, give him a little treat, because it's uncomfortable. This sounds so terrible, doesn't it? That Ginger had to be forced into doing it. That'd be really scary, too. Now, they did not give me a chance to know what they wanted. I was high-bred and had a great deal of spirit, and was very wild, no doubt, and gave them, I dare say, plenty of trouble. But then it was dreadful to be shut up in a stall day after day instead of having my liberty. And I fretted and pined and wanted to get loose. So Ginger knows that she was very spirited, had a lot of energy, but she was just a young horse and she just wanted some time to be able to have freedom or liberty. You know yourself it's bad enough when you have a kind master and plenty of coaxing, but there was nothing of that sort for me. So she's saying to Black Beauty, it was bad enough even with a good master. Can you imagine being broken in without the kind master? Now there was one, the old master, Mr. Ryder, who I think could soon have brought me round and could have done anything with me. But he had given me up all the hard part of the trade to his son and to another experienced man. And he only came at times to oversee. His son was a strong, tall, bold man. They called him Samson. And he used to boast that he had never found a horse that could throw him. So he's really proud that he is a great rider and a horse cannot ever buck him off. There was no gentleness in him, this man, Samson, as there was in his father, but there was only hardness, a hard voice, a hard eye, a hard hand. And I felt from the first that what he wanted was to wear all the spirit out of me and just make me into a quiet, humble, obedient piece of horseflesh. Horseflesh. Yes, that is all he thought about. And Ginger stamped her foot as if the very thought of him made her angry, which makes sense that it makes her angry. Now, this is something we'll talk about throughout the book a little bit, but this story has a lot of comparisons to what life was like for a lot of slaves in America before slavery was abolished. So now it's obviously illegal, but I know in second grade, if you were here at the school in second grade, you learned about the Civil War and what it was like for slaves who lived in our country. And sadly, there were some people who were slave owners that were like this, and they just wanted to have power over their slaves. And all slavery is evil and wrong, but there were some masters who were especially terrible to their slaves. And so men like this, men like Samson, they wanted to make sure that their slaves would do whatever they asked them to do. That's really sad that anybody would do that. Even more sad for somebody to do that to another human, but it's also sad for a horse that there would be this sense of the horse has to obey no matter what. And even though Ginger is just a young colt, she doesn't get any opportunities to just play. So Ginger went on. If I did not do exactly what he wanted, he would get put out and make me run round with that long rein in the training field till he had tired me out. And I think that he drank a good deal. This means he drank alcohol a lot. And I am quite sure that the oftener he drank, the worse it was for me. Sadly, we're going to see another character like this in the story who drinks too much alcohol and is then really cruel. So this man, Samson, the more of that he drinks, he's becoming meaner and meaner to his horse. Now, one day he had worked me hard in every way he could. And when I lay down, I was tired and miserable and angry. And it all seemed so hard. The next morning, he came for me early and ran me round again for a long time. I had scarcely had an hour's rest when he came again for me with his saddle and bridle and a new kind of bit. I could never quite tell how it came about. He had only just mounted me on the training ground when something I did put him out of temper, meaning Something Ginger did made this man angry. Ginger doesn't know what happened, what she did. And he chucked me hard with the new rein. The new bit was very painful. Remember, the bit is in between her teeth. And I reared up on her back legs suddenly, which angered him still more. She was just reacting, and now he's angry at her. And he began to flog me using the whip against her. He's trying to punish her, but she didn't do anything that deserved punishment. I felt my whole spirit set against him, and I began to kick and plunge and rear as I had never done before, and we had a regular fight. For a long time, he stuck to the saddle and punished me cruelly with his whip and spurs. But my blood was thoroughly up, and I cared for nothing he could do, if only I could get him off. At last, after a terrible struggle, I threw him off backward. I heard him fall heavily on the turf, or the grass, and without looking behind me, I galloped off to the other end of the field. Good for Ginger. She was able to get away. Then I turned round and saw my persecutor slowly rising from the ground and going into the stable. I stood under an oak tree and watched, but no one came to catch me. The time went on and the sun was very hot. The flies swarmed round me and settled on my bleeding flanks. That's her bottom. It's bleeding from the whip where the spurs had dug in. I felt hungry, for I had not eaten since the early morning, but there was not enough grass in that meadow for even a goose to live on. I wanted to lie down and rest, but with the saddle strapped tightly on, there was no comfort, and there was not a drop of water to drink. The afternoon wore on and the sun got low. I saw the other colts led in, and I knew they were having a good feed. At last, just as the sun went down, I saw the old master, this is Mr. Ryder, Samson's dad, come out with a sieve in his hand, and that's a tool for cutting wheat. He was a very fine old gentleman with quite white hair, but his voice was what I should know him by among 1,000. It was not high, not yet, nor yet low, but full and clear and kind. And when he gave orders, it was so steady and decided that everyone knew, both horse and men, that he expected to be obeyed. So he's saying things in a way that's strong, but it's not like Samson where he's hard and he just wants to be obeyed. No, he's saying things in a way that makes sense, so the horses know exactly what to do, and they know he's serious, so they need to obey him. He is a good leader. He came quietly along, now and then shaking the oats about that he had in the sieve, and speaking cheerfully and gently to me, said, "Come along, lassie, come along, lassie, come along, come along." Stood still and let him come up. He held the oats to me, and I began to eat without fear. Remember, she'd been very fearful before. She was scared of Samson. That's why she knocked him off, because she was scared, and then she eventually got angry even. Mainly, she was just scared. His voice took all my fear away. He stood by, patting and stroking me while I was eating, and seeing the clots of blood on my side. He seemed very vexed. Vexed means irritated or angry. Poor lassie, it was a bad business, a bad business. Then he quietly took the reins and he led me to the stable. Just at the door stood Samson. I laid my ears back and snapped at him. "Stand back," said the master. He's saying this to Samson, "and keep out of her way. You've done a bad day's work for this filly." He growled out something about a vicious brute. "Hark ye," said the father, "a bad-tempered man will never make a good-tempered horse." That is one good lesson. Means This could be true for parents and teachers as well, or bosses when you have a boss one day, that if someone has a bad temper, they're not going to make the person they're trying to lead have a good temper. Samson was trying to make Ginger have a good temper, but he was doing it through force and power. That's never going to work. You need to be like Mr. Ryder and be gentle and strict, but in a kind way so that the horse knows what they need to do. Okay, sorry, I lost my spot. You've not learned your trade yet, Samson. Then he led me into my box, took off the saddle and bridle with his own hands, and tied me up. Then he called for a pail of warm water and a sponge, took off his coat, and while the stableman held the pail, he sponged my sides a good while, so tenderly that I was sure he knew just how sore and bruised they were. "Whoa, my pretty one," he said. "Stand still, stand still." His very voice did me good, and the bathing was very comfortable. The skin was so broken at the corners of my mouth that I could not eat the hay. The stalks hurt me. You ever had cracked lips before? Like especially in the wintertime? He looked closely at it, at the sides of his mouth. He's being very observant. He shook his head and told the man to fetch a good bran mash. It's going to be kind of like an oatmeal, very soft, and put some meal into it. How good that mash was, and so soft and healing to my mouth. He stood by all the time I was eating, stroking me and talking to the man. "If a high-mettled creature like this," said he, "can't be broken by fair means, she will never be good for anything." After that, he often came to see me, and when my mouth was healed, the other breaker, Job, they called him, went on training me. Now he was steady and thoughtful, and I soon learned what he wanted. So that's the end of our 2 chapters. We are going to spend some time writing about that last chapter about Ginger in your literature assignment for tomorrow. So in that one, we're going to be writing a paragraph about Ginger's treatment and the lesson that we should learn from it. So I will talk to you all later. I hope that you're enjoying the story so far. That I know was a sad one overall. We're going to continue seeing a little bit more of Ginger's story, but it's just a good lesson that you need to be very kind, especially like this when somebody's leading another person. You've got to be very kind and keep in mind if they are hurting for any reason, and know that sometimes young kids and young horses, like in this story, just get their energy out. So that's important too. Okay, that's all for today. I'll talk to you later. Bye.